2021 was an important year for Turkey's relations with Africa. President Erdogan visited several countries on the continent, and he hosted a partnership summit with African leaders in Istanbul to forge new trade deals. But Ankara's ties with the continent go well beyond commercial opportunities. Turkish aid groups have provided assistance in drought-hit regions and conflict zones. And Turkey isn't the only country looking to engage the continent on a large scale. Decades after achieving independence, many African countries maintained close security and political ties with their former colonial rulers. But in places like Mali and Burkina Faso, that partnership is unraveling as rising militant attacks and frequent military coups expose the failed policies from countries like France. The other big player that many African countries have seen as an alternative to the West is China. Beijing has faced criticism for coercing African countries into debt-ridden trade deals. That has raised questions about long-term projects like China's trillion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative that looks to recreate the ancient Silk Road. But where does Turkey's engagement fit in? Has it found a different path to engage the continent? And to discuss those different approaches to engaging Africa, joining me now from Nairobi is Hassan Khannenje. He is the director of the Horn Institute, a research policy think tank. And from Hong Kong, David Arase. He is a resident professor at Hopkins-Nanjing Center. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. Hassan, what do you make of Turkey's Africa policies? How is Turkey's engagement with Africa different than China and the West?
I think in the better part of the last decade and a half, Africa has witnessed enormous interest from Ankara, as I think evidenced by the kind of investments, especially trade, as well as other investments that has tripled actually in the last 15 years, as well as Turkey increasingly becoming an indispensable player in the peace and security architecture in the Horn of Africa as well as in the in North Africa. Mm-hmm. And so this is, I think, a new phenomenon that wasn't exactly there before, but increasingly as a rising, middle power, Turkey perhaps has become one of those most influential countries in terms of soft power, as well as a degree of hard power, especially in so far as extending, for instance, military support, technological transfer, as evidenced by the recent conflict in Ethiopia, in which Turkey's role, I think, was critical in changing the balance of forces on the ground that has resulted into relative calm in Ethiopia as we speak.
So, David, what different opportunities do China, Turkey, and Russia offer in terms of security and stability as untraditional partners?
Well, they're all very different. China focuses on peace through development. They do an increasing amount of security cooperation, and their strong point in security cooperation is domestic stability, helping stability maintenance through their digital technologies and smart surveillance. Turkey, of course, sells these fantastic drones and armored personnel carriers, things like that. And Russia, of course, they have their mercenaries and weapons. So, they're different. They offer different menus of opportunities, I think, for Africa.
Mm-hmm. So, Hassan, what do you think has pushed Turkey to engage more with the African countries? What's the rationale behind this?
I think what is driving, Turkey in its new engagement in a policy within the continent, part of it is the reflection probably of the declining kind of influence that the West or traditionally has had on the continent, but as well as emerging opportunities within the continent that has been having, fast-growing economies. And I think Turkey has seen this as an opportunity to be able to exploit and be able to build relationships for future kind of engagement. Of course, in the wake of the changing dynamics in the world, in which the powers have been declining.
So, David, what is China doing right and wrong in the continent? How does China compare to other countries? I mean, is it emulating from other successes or learning from their mistakes? Give us a perspective on overall China's goals in the continent.
Well, first of all, what China is doing in Africa is on a very big scale for Africa. about a quarter of BRI construction and about 15% of total BRI investment since 2013. And we're talking a total of about $1 trillion. Of that amount, those numbers I just mentioned have been done in Africa with a huge impact. Of course, China's rocketed to become the top trade partner and one of the top four or five investors. But what's really changing things is its trademark. There's big projects in power, transportation, metals, real estate, and it's now moving into digital technologies, biomedical industries, cultural and security cooperation. So China, I think, has had a large impact. What it does wrong, or I don't know if you want to call it wrong, but some problems it has is, of course, its agenda is very donor-driven. In other words, it tends to serve China's needs very strongly. It's not multilaterally governed. It's purely bilaterally, and in a bilateral engagement, China has a lot of weight over African partners.
Yes, but David, does China use debt traps to force some African countries into its Belt and Road Initiative, or they do think that these giant investment projects will boost their economies and reduce their dependence to some Western powers?
Well, I think China offers an alternative to Western aid, particularly for governments that aren't eligible for Western aid for one reason or another. And one of the pros of Chinese aid is that there's a minimum of red tape, right? It's done quickly. And governments get resources to do things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to get. But of course, on the cons, or insufficient attention to sustainability very often, quality control, it creates a lot of official debt very quickly. Official debt, no bankruptcy is possible, and dependency, corruption, and it also takes away from a market incentive.
Yes. So Hassan, why do you think African countries are turning away from Europe and America and to Russia, China, and Turkey? And are they supplanting this traditional power and influence of several European countries from Northwestern Africa to become, let's say, more independent?
I think, as my colleague had just indicated, China is not exactly, or Russia, they're not supplanting the traditional African partners, but they're providing an alternative, except this alternative is a lot more friendly, especially when it comes to absence of conditionalities, when it comes to investment and aid, as well as not seeking to interfere in the internal affairs of African countries, something that most countries on the continent, as well as in the global south, have actually been very sensitive about. And so I think those two areas have made, I think, China a lot more attractive to a partner to deal, as opposed to what was happening previously.
So, David, considering that so many countries are trying to engage Africa on a large scale, is this a good thing for the continent? Will this global competition to win trade deals in Africa bring benefits and a variety of partners for these countries?
Yeah, I think so. It's a net benefit for Africa to have so many countries willing and able to help Africa. And this gives Africa a lot more leverage, more choice. The downside that you could see is that as these competitors, compete against one another very jealously,
yes,
you could also stir up conflict. So this is something that Africans should pay attention.
So, Hassan, do you think China, Russia, and Turkey are competing economically on the continent? I mean, do they have converging or conflicting interests? And how is that going to play out in the near future?
I think there's very little converging interests, but there's a lot of competing interests, especially since the three major powers, they've turned Africa into the next theater of geopolitics, and evidence all the way from the north to the Horn of Africa, where you see extreme competition comes to military basing, as well as investments. And so little evidence to show convergence, a lot of evidence to show divergence.
So, David, some Western interventions created tensions among civilians and the governments. What's the Turkish, Chinese, and Russian approach here?
Well, China really keeps relations at the state-to-state level. They don't engage so much with civil society. And they're very careful to work only with the sitting governments, or usually they're careful that way. Russia, of course, they have different capabilities. They have their mercenary forces, and Turkey. I'm not the expert on Turkey. So
Okay.
I'm not going to say.
Okay. All right, gentlemen. Unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.